Introduction. In his 2019 book, Stillness is the Key, Ryan Holiday guides readers using Stoic and Buddhist philosophies to show people how internal stillness can lead to doing great things, personal peace, and happiness. The world is packed with a 24/7 media cycle, which can be overwhelming and daunting, making it hard to find any quietness. Yet, Holiday remedies this issue by re-emphasizing techniques used for hundreds of years. He uses extensive examples of notable, successful people throughout history who found this stillness he describes and utilized it in high-pressure and inspiring circumstances. From sports stars to politicians, Holiday shows a full breadth of people who benefit from stillness, which shows that Holiday's tactics can be used in any career or personal scenario that feels unmanageable. Stillness is the Key not only shows that stillness works, but it also helpfully guides readers on how they too can achieve tranquility in their minds, which leads to the ability to handle situations that are externally chaotic. The world is not neat and orderly, but with patience and a quiet mind, each person can teach themselves to cope and even thrive in the disorder. The book astutely shows how the way people orient their brains can impact how they act. This audiobook encapsulates key takeaways found in the original book. We've also provided an in-depth analysis as well as removing any fluff to save you hours of your time. If you've read the original, then this audio summary will help you solidify the most important lessons. Preface. In his book, Stillness is the Key, Ryan Holiday begins by describing the prolific Roman, Seneca, who lived in the cacophonous hubbub of Rome in the 1st century. Seneca was having financial problems and was aging. However, he kept writing with clarity because Seneca was able to make himself concentrate and not allow the chaos of the outside world to shake his inner world. As a Stoic philosopher, Seneca believed that a person could obtain inner peace even if the rest of the world was at war. There are many words that have been used for this concept throughout history, but in English it is stillness, a concept supported by basically all religions and philosophical schools. Introduction. Throughout history, personal and professional problems have bogged people down, making it hard for them to control their lives. Holiday explains that stillness allows people to have new ideas, see connections, and leave space for the illumination of perceptions. It is necessary to find this stillness to succeed, or else the wild, unpredictable outside world will hinder us from being the people we want to be. The key to everything. Holiday uses the example of the Civil War to show the usefulness of stillness. On one occasion, Lincoln gave an address to a group of military officials and politicians and claimed that Vicksburg would be the key to winning the war, which would prove true years later when the war finally ended. Lincoln could see the importance of Vicksburg, whereas his advisors could not because he had the internal stillness that Holiday emphasizes, and accordingly, this stillness is important in all areas of our lives. This stillness can be yours. Anyone who has experienced a burst of thought during a moment of concentration knows the feeling of stillness. The kind of stillness Holiday describes can include movement because the stillness happens within us. We have all felt this stillness before, and it is something we all need to better incorporate in our lives. Therefore, Stillness is the Key uses 3 parts of humans, mind, body, and soul, to illustrate, by applying vivid examples, how stillness can be achieved and allow us to cease to be at war with the world, and within ourselves, and to establish a lasting inner and outer peace instead. Part 1. Mind. The domain of the mind. In 1962, John F. Kennedy was faced with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which could have ended in nuclear war, potentially killing millions. The tensions between the United States and the USSR were heating up, but after the Bay of Pigs disaster, Kennedy knew he couldn't deal with the threat with rash aggression. To keep his cool, Kennedy drew images of the ocean on a legal pad to avoid irrational decisions, and to understand rather than vilify the Soviets, which led to a better idea of how to approach the situation. Kennedy eventually decided on a blockade. The Cuban Missile Crisis was clearly a stressful situation, but Kennedy was able to approach it with an impressive tranquility. He would go off for alone time when things got too hectic, so he could recollect himself, and as Holliday says, he is the stillest guy in the room. As a result, the United States and the USSR were able to negotiate and put an end to the crisis before nuclear war began. While we don't all face the risk of nuclear war in our decisions, every person has turmoil and obstacles that feel important to us. To handle these situations, we must find stillness and be able to go into the situation with an open mind, attention, and the ability to silently reflect without disruption so we can make decisions without freezing up. Stillness takes effort, but patience and persistence can help us achieve this goal. Become present. Being present is arduous for people, especially when our minds tend to drift to all the other things happening around us. We stand in front of a room, but instead of focusing on what we're doing there, we let our mind wander to worries about what other people think of us, and when this happens, we lose the opportunity to be present. We can't experience the best part of whatever we're doing when we aren't present. If we are not living in the moment, we close our minds to the everyday wonders around us. We have to choose to exist in the current moment, and if we're distracted by thoughts of what was or what will be, we become oblivious to our surroundings. Holliday urges us to be present even when a moment isn't going the way we anticipated, because the present keeps showing up to give you a second chance, and that's why it is so miraculous to be present. Limit your inputs. The CNN effect, or the reactiveness required of leaders because of the 24-hour news cycle, makes it hard for people to be choosy about which inputs to emphasize. Nevertheless, it's crucial for people to focus on information that will help with their pursuits rather than distract them. The information-saturated world provides us with so many inputs that it can be overwhelming and push us off course. We drown in a flood of facts that are mostly unimportant to the matter at hand. But by focusing on what is important, people are less likely to act with urgency and have more time to contemplate and analyze situations. If we organize our inputs and limit the chaos of the world outside ourselves, we can be present and find stillness in the process. Stillness often makes us uncomfortable, but the discomfort leads us to success. Empty the mind. The Los Angeles Dodgers player Shawn Green struggled at the beginning of his third year in Major League Baseball. The pressure was mounting as he needed to bring up his stats for job security, and this pressure induced even more stress when Green tried to hit the balls. To get back on track, Green had to empty his mind and trust his training rather than overthinking, but that was easier said than done. Eventually, Green was able to do exactly that and emerge from his slump. He learned to be present in the moment, not stuck in his fear-filled head. He hit 4 home runs in one game, which is an impressive feat in baseball. People need to think, of course, and analyze situations, but we also must keep an empty space in our minds so ideas and inspiration have a place to enter our thoughts. Some doubt is natural, but to let doubt overwhelm us makes overcoming obstacles a struggle. Slow down. Think deeply. The children's show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, discreetly urges children to slow down, be considerate, be aware. The show's namesake, Fred Rogers, was bullied as a child, and this experience taught him to observe the people around him and understand that there was more to those people than what he could initially see. A mere first impression can lead us to act erroneously. Stoicism and Buddhism compare the world to muddy water, because to see into this water, we must first wait for the dirt to settle. Mr. Rogers taught kids to slow down and ponder, rather than rushing to conclusions. Questions with complex answers must be meditated over. People cannot get anywhere by trying to force answers simply because they're in a hurry. If we're patient, the answers to our questions become obvious, like the muddy water becoming clear. This understanding is called satori. Additionally, communication with other people can be imperative. There are people willing to give assistance and support when things don't go as planned. It is more beneficial to think deliberately, so we see things other people were too preoccupied to see. Start journaling. Holliday begins the chapter by referencing Anne Frank's diary. Anne detailed her family's time hiding in an attic to avoid Nazi persecution during World War II. She wanted the journal to be a source of comfort and support, and it turned out to be a huge one as she remained hiding in the attic for 2 years. Anne's diary was cathartic because she could express her feelings and emotions during a vulnerable age, which was harder given the life-threatening circumstances. Anne was a young girl faced with horrifying circumstances, but she was able to be insightful and reassured by her journal. Countless other successful people have taken to journaling, and while some only journaled from time to time, in all cases, the act of reflection is important. Journals are to wage peace with oneself. They allow the writer to make peace with their own thoughts, which then frees the writer to act with a clearer head in their pursuits. Research has also shown that after traumatic events, journaling can help people better recover from whatever difficult experiences they have faced. Journaling is a release of emotions and thoughts that we'd otherwise have to lug around. The great thing about journaling is that there are no strict rules of how to do it properly. Ultimately, what matters most is that people journal for themselves and do so to make peace with their thoughts. Making time to journal can be imperative for mental acuity, and it might be the most helpful thing a person does in their day. Cultivate silence. One composer, John Cage, was fascinated with the notion of silence, even suggesting that there should be a national day dedicated to it, believing that with silence comes discipline. As a composer and one who loved sound, Cage believed that silence was more about listening past the noise than about the absence of all sound. In other words, he thought it was important to reduce the unnecessary noise, so he could tune into more important sounds that would otherwise go unheard. Cage's piece, 433, was dedicated to creating a song that displays disciplined sound that is separated from noise, and it seems contradictory, but it truly shows the power of creating silence. Noise-canceling headphones show this concept. They were made to block out noise so people can focus on specific sounds instead. Complete silence, of course, cannot exist in a world with so much commotion, but people can learn to cultivate a specific type of silence. It's the choice to tune into selected inputs and become more aware of what is happening around us instead of being overwhelmed by the clamor that inevitably exists. Through this technique, we can listen to things that may have otherwise gone unheard, despite being important information. Seek wisdom. In 426 BC, the Greek priestess of Delphi said there was no one wiser than Socrates, which surprised Socrates himself, who often expressed that he didn't know anything. This is perhaps the most profound part of his wisdom. All Socrates claimed to truly know was that he didn't know, which is the heart of the Socratic method. This method uses a stream of questions to elicit thoughtfulness and keep people open to the truth being something different than expected. It's crucial to follow Socrates' lead and remain open to wisdom and learning, because what we think we know is not the truth. Without this attitude, people can close themselves off from learning and growing. Hitler is an example of someone who refused to adapt his knowledge to reflect additional information. He continued to think his atrocious ideas were right, despite reading history books during his time in prison. He refused to be open to his lack of knowledge, causing him to be unable to evolve, which is not wisdom. There are many definitions and schools of thought on wisdom, but all the ideas suggest that people need to ask questions and be open to the idea that the knowledge we have might be untrue. Referring to Buddhism, even Buddha needed teachers, showing that within ourselves we can never be all-knowing. Wisdom is learning to take the guidance of others and put ourselves in situations that are unfamiliar. The discoveries we make may unsettle us, but that's necessary because when we follow doubt, we find truth. Find confidence. Avoid ego. Confidence should not stem from ego. Rather, it should be built from practice. It's important to know our strengths and be able to feel confident because we've done similar things in the past. Humility is necessary for confidence to be an asset. In the story of David and Goliath, David was outmatched by Goliath, and Goliath prodded David, acting arrogantly. When David confidently attacked, Goliath became fearful and was killed by his own sword. Goliath's ego made him see David as an enemy. Further, it made him overconfident and ill-equipped to deal with his challenger. People with egos can sometimes be successful, but they don't live enviable lives because they are obsessed with themselves and their insecurities, so they recognize little else. At the other extreme is imposter syndrome, which is the tendency for people to think they are unqualified in their roles and that if they aren't careful, they will be exposed as imposters. Like an overinflated ego, this can undermine efforts to be successful. Confidence without ego is helpful for success and happiness because a confident person can deal with hard situations without being defeated by feelings of inadequacy or the need to prove their prowess. Confident people know when to be true to their own course, while also being able to take feedback and grow from that feedback. They aren't crippled by doubt or hubris. In fact, they can be open to doubt and welcome stillness into their thought processes all at once. Let go. It may seem crucial to have a well-defined purpose when going into a situation, but Holliday argues that when a person becomes too set on a certain outcome, it becomes more grueling to achieve one's goals. Thus, stillness allows us to take that pressure to succeed off and focus on what matters instead of our apprehensions. Letting go is vital because we need to stop trying to master our pursuits and instead focus on the process rather than the results. We cannot skip all the steps and simply jump to the glamorous victory. We have to work towards that victory and practice so we can build confidence and live in the moment because that's how we learn. We must balance between being attached to what we want and letting go of weighty expectations. On to what's next. In life, we face decisions and obstacles that would be hindered by letting ourselves get drawn into the noise and the chatter of the world. Therefore, we must focus on the tools outlined by Holliday: being present, tuning out the noise, being selective over inputs, knowing that we don't know, journaling, and emptying our minds. These things and others help us find stillness, which is often temporary because of all the distractions. Nevertheless, we should work to having more stillness in our lives rather than just brief moments of it. To do this, our three domains, the mind, the heart, and the body, must be in harmony. We've heard about how to achieve stillness in the mind, and now we will learn how to find it in our hearts. Part 2. Spirit, the domain of the soul. In 2008, Tiger Woods won his third U.S. Open after competing with a torn ACL and a fractured leg. Then, a cheating scandal and an injury left his life in chaos. Additionally, he crashed his car, adding to the implosion of his life. The press scrutinized him, and his marriage fell apart. It would take him over 10 years to recover. From the time he started to toddle, Woods played golf and dedicated his life to the sport. Woods' father was brutal with his training, wanting to ensure his son was mentally equipped for the challenges of the sport. And with one word, enough, Tiger's father knew to back off, though Tiger never uttered that word. Tiger Woods became a prolific golfer, a prodigy if ever there was one, but despite this, Woods was not happy even when he had everything he wanted. Then his father died, and Tiger's life began to spiral because, while he was mentally tough, mental stillness will be short-lived if our hearts are on fire. If our hearts are not satisfied, we cannot find tranquility because our emotions must be dealt with for our knowledge and skills to give us contentment. Thus, while we first had work to do on our minds, we now have spiritual work to do. Choose virtue. Stoics believed that virtue was the highest good, emphasizing that rightness comes from our souls and becomes part of our daily actions. Eastern thinkers had similar ideas of virtue. Moral codes allow for easier decisions, so we don't have to analyze every situation. Further, without right or wrong, life loses meaning. People with virtue, therefore, can find stillness because they act according to their values, rather than clogging their minds with overthinking. Virtue leads us to a happy life, because someone who does not rely on virtue is perpetually full of worry. To find our values, we must do self-reflection and determine what's important to us and what our heart is telling us is right. Any success we have means nothing if it's not something we value as being good. Money means nothing if we have to go against what our hearts are telling us will satisfy us. We can succeed by cheating, but such success is not nearly as reliable as success by virtue, because when we compromise our morals, we are compromising ourselves, which can never lead to long-lasting flourishing. When life gets chaotic, we can call upon our virtues to create still assuredness. Heal the inner child. Leonardo da Vinci had a difficult childhood as a bastard son from a well-off family, but he maintained his childlike state of wonder, invention, and exploration despite his strife. Leonardo's father died, leaving all his possessions to his 12 legitimate children and nothing to Leonardo, showing how Leonardo was never fully accepted by his father. At 25, Leonardo met the murderous Cesare Borgia, a patron, but it took him a long time to find someone who would support his work, because he stubbornly carried the hurts and wounds caused by his father's lack of affection. Many people carry painful memories from childhood that shape the way they act in adult life because those versions of themselves still live inside them even when they are adults. People may act based on childhood wounds without being consciously aware of why they are acting that way. To remedy this, we must look into ourselves and think about our inner child. This child needs to be comforted and reassured, and doing so will be good not only in our personal and career pursuits, but it will help our relationships with other people. A straightforward way to heal is by sharing the love and compassion our inner children deserve to others. Give more. Give what you didn't get. Love more. Drop the old story. By healing the inner child, people can calm the turmoil in their hearts. Beware desire. Holliday starts this chapter by referring again to John F. Kennedy. As a young child, Kennedy watched his father have affairs, bringing mistresses home and to family vacations. Kennedy inherited many of his father's habits. He had a large sex drive, which got him into trouble in the early World War II days when he dated a woman who was rumored to be a Nazi spy, and later when he had an affair with the girlfriend of a mobster. In the White House, Kennedy's philandering continued, and during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he had an affair with a 19-year-old girl. This kind of life does not represent stillness. We all have lusts, perhaps not sexual lusts, but we all desire for things. This lust undermines stillness and can result in great people losing everything. A common form of lust is envy, when we want what others have. Jealousy puts us in the unenviable position of constantly wanting the good things other people have, but none of the undesirable portions of their lives. We want to be the eccentric millionaire without the loneliness and distrust that millionaire may feel. This mindset is bound to keep us wanting a life that cannot exist. We become stuck in our own fantasy, and it results in discontent. Desires are often not rational. They are emotions, so to avoid this tendency of letting ourselves be ruled by lust, we must stand behind our personal virtue to resist these harmful yearnings. We must acknowledge our impulses and learn to stop them before we act, so we can find pleasure rooted in a soul that's true and stable, happy and secure. Enough. Author Joseph Heller once told fellow author Kurt Vonnegut that he had something a billionaire could never have, the understanding that he had enough. When people have enough, they find stillness because enoughness comes with a confident security in self that comparison cannot break. This concept is hard for people to come to terms with because we struggle to let go of the idea that our achievements should always provide relief and happiness. Unfortunately, people often get to the point of an existential crisis when they desire so much. As they get what they want and feel no reward, they either ignore the feelings of discontent and continue their delusional pursuit of things that won't lead to happiness, or they deal with the painful process of self-discovery. In short, constantly wanting drives people to never feel content, focused instead on what achievement should be next, rather than enjoying the present goodness in their lives. We need temperance to feel that enoughness. Victories are nice, but we can't let them overshadow the day-to-day people and experiences that make us truly happy. We can have goals and learn to have inner peace even when we don't fully achieve those dreams. Enough doesn't mean we stop working or doing things that may bring success. It merely means that we make peace with what we have, and don't have that self-defeating drive to always have more. Bathe in beauty. One day, Anne Frank peeked out a small window into the open world, beyond the cramped attic annex where she lived. Anne was able to find serenity and contentment looking at the beautiful sky, despite the grim circumstances that were all around her. She thought that nature was a cure to all things sad, and she wrote, "Beauty remains even in the misfortune. If you just look for it, you discover more and more happiness, and regain your balance." These powerful words show how people can find strength from beautiful things around them, because such things are good for the soul. There's a term for experiences that feel divinely beautiful, ecstasis. We can find these moments any time. Finding them requires an openness to the beauty around us. We must allow our souls to embrace the beauty that surrounds us instead of looking at the eyesores. We must develop a poet's eye, because while the beauty isn't always initially obvious, it is always there, waiting for us to unearth it. However, Holiday warns against finding beauty in superficial things like money or popularity. Rather, we should look to things that will fill our souls, fueling them to seek still moments. We must submerge ourselves in this beauty, reviving ourselves from the worries and stress of the chaotic world around us. As Holiday says, let every experience be church-like. Accept a higher power. In 12-step programs, addicts are encouraged but struggle to accept a higher power. It's difficult for people to acknowledge that there's something greater than themselves that can restore them from the depths of their discontent. Many people object to this step on the basis that they don't believe in God. However, accepting a higher power is spiritual but not necessarily religious. To accept a higher power, one must have faith and surrender self-obsessed behaviors. There are various words to describe this power. Stoics have logos, or fate. Chinese philosophy has Tao, the order and way of the higher spirit. And the Greeks have a spirit that guides them, daemon. Many cultures have similar higher powers. Yet science has caused people to stray from believing in higher powers, and has put a wedge between us and spiritual contentment. Higher powers give us something bigger than ourselves, and without it, we lose an important part of our humanity. Holiday points out that nihilists often kill themselves or go mad because, since they don't believe in a higher power, they must deal with life using only their minds, which is a losing battle because there are so many things we cannot control. A higher power allows us to calm our brains and look beyond ourselves for purpose and contentment. Enter relationships. After his first marriage ended, Johnny Cash moved to a new house in Tennessee, and when he got there, he broke down crying because he realized someone, very important was missing from the house, his daughter, who was in California with her mother. This anecdote shows how crucial relationships are to our soul. Good relationships take time and effort to build. They also require maintenance, and sometimes our inner child makes it difficult to make the necessary room for other people in our lives, because we are drawn by selfish pursuits, rather than by trying to keep our relationships intact. We follow our lust and hurt the people we love. Good relationships are demanding, requiring vulnerability and surrender, which is never easy. There's an inaccurate idea that ambitious people must self-isolate, but Holiday disputes that. He gives the example of Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, who described her husband as being an important confidant and supporter who aided in her success. Similarly, Holiday shows that in all careers, from philosophy to music, people can be successful and happier with the support of loved ones. Further, he suggests that stillness and success are both better when they are shared. Even if success can be found in solitude, it is meaningless because a life without people creates a hollow quiet and an empty ease. Thus, to have true stillness, we need other people. Conquer your anger. Michael Jordan was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2009, at which time he gave a speech that listed the affronts he got throughout his career. During his speech, it became evident that Michael was still angry over incidents such as not making the varsity team as a freshman in high school because he was beat out by a 6'7" senior named Leroy. He spent a half hour referencing slights he received, not projecting how hard he worked to be successful, but how angry he was at all the people who snubbed him, showing how potent anger is and how it interferes with happiness. Holiday goes on to describe how Richard Nixon, unaware of his own anger-driven nature, once said, "Always remember, others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them. And then you destroy yourself." Bursts of anger may motivate us, but the productiveness of anger is short-term because anger becomes an obstacle when, suddenly, a small comment turns someone into an enemy. Unresolved anger is a wound that keeps bleeding. We hurt ourselves by staying angry, and we sacrifice our chance at having inner peace. We cannot be still if rage is burning inside us so brightly that we cannot see past our angry inferno. Anger should be replaced with love, gratitude, and purpose, which help us succeed without hurting other people. All is one. Being able to look at humanity and know that we are unified is called agape, which is the love that comes from having a higher power and being created in the image of that higher power. The knowledge that we are all connected is powerful. Through this, we learn not to be selfish because we're all just individuals in a larger body of people. We each are necessary parts, but the whole is still greater than the parts. This mindset gives us the ability to relate to people who disagree with us. Instead of villainizing those different than us, we can take our emotions and apply them to any human who has lived. Our pain and our joy alike can connect us to even those who seem radically different. Additionally, we can also apply this to our relationships with animals, who we share a world with. Ultimately, knowing that we are more the same than different is liberating. By seeing beyond ourselves, we can make peace in our souls. On to what's next. Initially, we first attempted to find stillness in our minds, but then we began to look into the soul to find how to make peace with the chaos in our hearts. Together, we can use these two avenues to create harmony and stillness within ourselves, tasks that are not easy but necessary. Thus far, we've had an emotional journey, full of abstractions and internal work, but stillness requires more than that. We must also address how stillness applies to our bodies, where our hearts and minds reside. Our bodies can be running, dancing, or jumping, and they can still have stillness. In fact, movement gives meaning to our stillness, but it is when we overwork our bodies that we do not have stillness. Thus, we must also focus on our bodies so that we can support the work we've already done in our minds and in our hearts. Part 3. Body. The domain of the body. Winston Churchill spent his life actively engaged. He saw combat at 21 and then wrote a book about it. At 26, he already held public office and had begun his long career as a politician. He was a leader through World War II into the Cold War. He first traveled by steamship and eventually by plane. He watched the world change in so many ways, but even so, there was stillness in his life. To keep up with all that he was demanded to do, Churchill didn't waste his energy. He also kept a sense of humor and an appreciation for the beautiful things in life. Moreover, he knew how to find stillness in the domain of the body expertly. When Churchill was young, his body was frail, but he was able to overcome bodily obstacles with a strong mind and heart. He wrote books, but he also thrust himself into war so that he actually experienced what war was like. At one point, he was even taken prisoner and was lucky to make it out alive. Then he took political office and knew he couldn't succeed alone, so he married his wife Clementine and committed his body to another. To achieve greatness, Churchill relied on bodily routine. For example, he would take a bath every morning, eventually ease into some reading, then at lunchtime would greet his wife. He would take a walk in the countryside and sit on his porch to think or recite poetry. He would nap, spend time with his family, and take another bath before eventually going to bed. He stuck to his routine even during the holidays. He made room for hobbies like bricklaying or painting, even if he wasn't very good at them. Nevertheless, they were things he did because they gave him peace and happiness. Of course, Churchill had flaws and made mistakes, but what made him successful was his ability to go out into the world and indulge in his interests. With this mindset, Churchill was able to take failure and come back from it. He took his failure and used it as a moment for meditation and personal growth. He was able to remain self-assured even when his opinions were initially unfavorable. He worked hard and knew how to incorporate bodily stillness into his life. which made all the difference because if we don't take care of our bodies, there's no chance the other two domains can give us stillness on their own. Say no. Fabius was tasked with leading the Roman soldiers against Hannibal, but he did not attack, which many people thought was because Fabius was weak, using the rationale that the strongest army in the world shouldn't cower. However, it was actually a clever strategy. Hannibal's forces were victims of the elephant. Hannibal's forces were victims of the elements, and Fabius knew that Hannibal could not replace his troops. It made more sense to hold off the attack until Hannibal's troops were more vulnerable. Unfortunately, behind Fabius's back, a commander was convinced to attack, which had devastating results. Fabius represents how crucial it is to say no to the internal or external pressure to act urgently. Wu Wei is the ability not to act. This power can be seen through a baseball player's ability to try not to hit the ball until the pitch is right, or John F. Kennedy waiting before acting during the Cuban Missile Crisis. In these instances, it can appear that people should be doing more, but in fact, it is patience that created success because high-stakes scenarios should be thought through and time should be dedicated to contemplation. As Holliday helpfully explains, the yellow and red on a traffic light are just as important as the green because they remind us to slow down and stop rather than simply rushing through. People struggle to stay still. In one study, instead of doing nothing, people chose to shock themselves, highlighting how motion is encouraged while stillness is seen as weak or boring. To resist this pressure to constantly go, we must learn to say no so that we can say yes to the things that matter. Take a walk. Many notable people have made time for walking in their busy lives. Martin Luther King Jr., Steve Jobs, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, Walt Whitman, Ulysses S. Grant, and even Jesus. The Buddhists have a name for this, Kinhin, or walking meditation. For walking to be helpful, people need to be open as they walk and live in the moment. Worries and stress should be put aside, deep breaths taken, and thoughts left to the current moment. We should think of the natural things around us and the path we're on. These walks should be leisurely and allow us to detach from the world that pressures us. Appreciate the sights, and know that the point is not to get rid of every thought, but to allow mental activity as you interact with the things around you. Slow, leisurely strolls can help us access parts of our minds that would otherwise be blocked by stress. They allow us to live in the stillness and escape all the things that overwhelm us, so we can reorient ourselves to what is important. Build a routine. Fred Rogers started his day with reflection and would go for a swim before heading to the set of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Even the show followed an orderly routine as the intro began and the predictable sequence of the show commenced. He'd wrap up filming, nap, have dinner, and go to sleep. Perhaps this life is not the most exciting, but Mr. Rogers' routine gave him stability and tranquility. Mr. Rogers is in good company among those who love routine. Sports stars, writers, politicians, and many others have all benefited from routine. President Eisenhower once said freedom was the opportunity for self-discipline, because that discipline is how we orient our minds to do great things. Without discipline, it is hard to accomplish anything. When we focus on our work through routines, it's easier to accomplish what we want to accomplish. Routines can be found in many ways. Routines based on time are probably the most obvious, but a routine can also be found in actions like a prayer before a meal, or arranging things in a certain order. These routines are then ritualized, which makes them have a deeper meaning. Our bodies become accustomed to routine, and routine simplifies the complexities of life by limiting the number of choices we make in a day. Thus, we should make habits our ally instead of our enemy. Get rid of your stuff. To find stillness, we cannot let physical belongings control us. Diogenes the Cynic took this idea to heart. On one occasion, he saw a child drinking water with his hands, and as a result, Diogenes destroyed his cup upon realizing that it was unnecessary. The Stoics, meanwhile, took a less drastic approach, determining that while we can keep some of our possessions, we should remain aware of these possessions. Too often our belongings imprison us. We let our sense of self be driven by what and how much we have, regardless of how much joy our possessions bring. Having so much stuff can be overwhelming, and we become wrapped up in possessions that add nothing to our lives because we interconnect our worth with these items. Additionally, we become accustomed to having luxury and forget what normal is like. We become obsessed with hoarding what we have, and not losing it just because we're scared to give it up. To fix the issue of being controlled by the things we own, we need to let go of items we don't use. Not only does this clear our house, but it makes space within ourselves for stillness. Further, we need to value possessions that make our lives easier rather than ones that will impress our neighbors. Also, we shouldn't avoid wearing our nice jewelry merely because we're afraid to lose it. It's the memories, not the items, that matter. Having to worry about breaking the nice china only adds undue stress. Instead, we should embrace the items we have and get rid of the ones we no longer have a place for. Seek the solitude. Most people live lives surrounded by other people, which makes it paramount to find moments of solitude. Of course, as mentioned previously, it's crucial not to isolate ourselves. Nevertheless, moments alone can help tame the noise that distracts us. It's difficult to think clearly when we're surrounded by chatter, because clarity doesn't come when your life is a constant party and your home is a constant construction site. As Leonardo da Vinci worked on The Last Supper, he arrived at the monastery early so he could have time to himself before he began working to let creative thoughts swirl in his head. To find his thoughts, he detached from the rest of the world and focused on his internal one, which highlights the balance between attached and detached that Holiday emphasizes throughout the book. An error many people make is not trying to cultivate silence. Great thoughts happen when we go for a walk or take a shower, because these are moments we have to ourselves to reflect and give our minds a break from all external business. We're stillest in those quiet moments before we get out of bed, or are sitting by ourselves and daydreaming. In those moments, time seems to slow down, and the rush we felt before retreats to a sometimes shocking but manageable pace. These moments won't always be leisurely, because they can lead to us debating ideas or doubting things we already know, but we need to give our bodies, as Virginia Woolf put it, a room of our own. Be a human being. The husband of Queen Victoria, Albert, died from Crohn's disease that had worsened by stress. Throughout his life, he overworked himself and found little time for fun. Athletes most commonly injure themselves because of overuse. Evidently, working too hard is not compatible with living ideally. Michael Phelps stopped swimming for a while because he was burnt out. It didn't matter how successful he was at that point, because he'd pushed himself to the point of unhappiness. He eventually began swimming again because he was able to find a balance between working hard and enjoying life. We all have duties, but it is okay to say no to pushing ourselves past our limits, and it can help us do better work in the long run. When we're overworked, we become tired and make more mistakes that we must fix later. As Holiday says, it's human being, not human doing, for a reason. Therefore, we must be aware of what our bodies can do and know when to draw the line and give ourselves a break. Go to sleep. There are numerous reasons why the clothing company American Apparel failed, but one reason was the open-door policy of Dov Charney. Charney decided that he would allow any person in the company, even just sales associates, to be able to email and call him. He even made his phone number public. As the company grew, this policy became a problem. The company branched out into 20 countries, and Charney could hardly sleep because so many people wanted to speak to him in many different time zones. Without sleep, people's cognitive functions become comparable to someone who is intoxicated. The sleep deprivation of the company's leader made the hard task of keeping a business afloat even harder. Charney became unhinged, and even basic decisions were impaired. He contradicted himself and began to lose control of his company. Sleep is not a luxury. People need it, and if we don't get it, we cannot function properly, which only makes our lives harder. The body is healthier with a rested mind, and that is crucial to finding serenity. Find a hobby. A Prime Minister of England who predated Winston Churchill liked to chop down rotten trees in the woods near his house as a way to relax his mind from the intensity of political life. Jobs have gotten less physical in recent times, but they are also harder on the mind and soul, Holliday says. Thus, leisure can be crucial to people's mental well-being. Leisure is not about doing nothing. Rather, it is doing things that are relaxing and separated from survival. Successful people often have hobbies that give them a break from their work. Herbert Hoover loved to fish, for example, and wrote a book called Fishing for Fun and to Wash Your Soul, which nicely illustrates the spirit of hobbies. Leisure requires moving the body, but it is a rest for the mind and the heart. Any hobby will do. Reading, running, building models, and all that it really needs to do is be fun for you. It should be an outlet from the things that stress and burden you. Leisure is good for the soul, but the minute it becomes an obligation or feels compulsory, it is no longer leisure because leisure has to be a choice, and it has to embrace stillness. It's easy to say we don't have time for such pursuits, but time can be made if we make such moments a priority and are disciplined with it. Beware escapism. Writer John Fante wanted an escape after his novel failed. He took to playing pinball for hours and drinking. Herein shows the difference between trying to escape and leisure. Fante wanted to escape his life rather than embrace it. Leisure requires being present and opening your heart and soul, while escaping is closed off to stillness. Escaping is retreating to the noise and chaos of your mind, and refusing to be open to moving away from despair. Sadness does not go away, no matter how far a person tries to run away from it. To fix sadness, a person must face themselves. Unfortunately, trying to escape doesn't work because we cannot escape ourselves, so it is pointless to try. And when we feel the pressure to escape, we must look inward at ourselves and stop fleeing. We must use techniques detailed in the book to access stillness, walking, journaling, etc. As Holliday says, tuning out accomplishes nothing. Tune in. Act bravely. To describe how people need to act bravely, Holliday begins by describing Camus' fictional character, a man who thinks he is a good person until he sees people react to him negatively. After that, he begins to self-reflect. He regrets a moment when he heard a woman calling out for help, and he did nothing to help her. He goes through life waiting for a similar moment to happen so he can alleviate the agony he feels at having done nothing. The story shows how important actions are, and as Holliday poignantly points out, the health of our spiritual ideals depends on what we do with our bodies in moments of truth. Buddhists and Stoics both believe that good actions are the ones that come naturally to us. Being still does not mean that we should extricate ourselves from the world and ignore bad things that are happening. Rather, stillness should be used to help people. We should use our virtue to promote what Aristotle called eudaimonia, which refers to human flourishing. People who do good things will feel confident about themselves and will feel that they are enough. Good deeds create a world worth living in, and action requires us to live in the moment and find a higher power that is beyond us. Going out into the world and trying to right wrongs will give us internal peace and perhaps create outer peace as well. Do kindness where you can, because you'll have to find a way to live with yourself if you don't, is Holliday's final powerful advice of the chapter. On to the final act. Emperor Antonius Pius was 74 years old when he realized he was about to die in AD 161. In his final breath, he uttered the word aequanimitas, referring to peace in the mind. Hundreds of years prior to that, Buddha knew that he was going to die as well, and sought to give words of wisdom to his students just as Antonius had done, telling them, "All individual things pass away. Seek your liberation with diligence." In a third instance, between Antonius and Buddha, Epicurus wrote his wisdom out in a letter just before he died, writing about his heart's contentment. These three instances represent the stillness discussed in the three domains, mind, heart, and body, which are all interlinked to our ability to find inner contentment. No person can know when they will die, but we all will, which causes people much distress. Tomorrow we could become sick and die within months. We are all bound to die. As we live, we must prioritize the stillness of the three domains that were discussed in Holliday's book, because in death we will have final, never-ending stillness. Afterword. In the afterword, Holliday describes an evening at home in which he embodies the principles he dictates in the book. He's finished writing and starts to work on his farm. He lets his young son help him for a bit and begins work on fixing his fence. He leaves his work out of his thoughts and continues pushing through the tasks on the farm without much fuss. Eventually, he becomes a little upset that a neighbor's bull is on his property, but he keeps his cool and knows to remain patient, not rushing to move the bull because that could be dangerous to both him and the bull. Holliday eases the bull in the right direction, and he can relax. He looks at his farm and takes in his surroundings, appreciating the beauty of nature. His work is distant, and his world is still. Holliday concludes his book with the fitting words, "My mind is empty, my heart is full, my body is busy. Atamen tranquillus." If you found this audio valuable, please take a few minutes of your time to leave us a review. The end.